Hello and welcome to this podcast. This is my first podcast, so it's number one, and I don't know if there'll be more or not. It depends on if there's any interest from the audience. So, this podcast is directed at anybody or any family that's had a recent catastrophic event that's been a life changing event. In my case, for example, and by the way, my name is Mike, in July of 2017, after several months of having just horrific pain on my scalp, we went and got a biopsy and found out that I had cancer on the scalp, a basal cell carcinoma, but it was metastatic, which means that it either had spread or has the ability to spread all over the body. At that time, I went and did some reading about it and found out that it's mostly fatal. Very few chances of recovering it. They do have a new drug called a hedgehog pathway inhibitor, but it was $120,000 a year and my insurance company wouldn't cover it. So we elected to go with a major excision on my scalp, including clearing all the way down to the skull, which means removing the galea. And so we did all that and they still weren't able to clear it. So they decided to do radiation treatments. And before we even got to the radiation treatments, I had a second catastrophic event, which was I lost almost all of my vision through a thing called non-arterial ischemic optic neuropathy. Well, it turns out that the surgery had triggered the optic neuropathy, but nobody could have known that, so I don't blame the surgeon or anybody else. It's just what happened. It's an hereditary condition. My mom had had optic neuropathy, but she never had really talked about it because when she had her event, she actually worked at an eye clinic in an army hospital, and they were able to put her on high doses of prednisone and stop the event, and she lost almost no vision, and she remained that way for the rest of her life. In my case, because of the way insurance works now, you get bounced from one provider to another, and you have to wait for referrals, and it took a month and a half before I was seen by Barrows Neurological Institute in Phoenix, and by the time I was seen, almost all my vision had been permanently removed through optic nerve damage. So my whole life went upside down. Also, before the event, I just accepted a new job, a really great job, working for a major semiconductor company as a vendor or contractor, overseeing some construction projects. I just gotten a new Harley Davidson from my wife. She had given it to me as a gift. And so everything in my life was just perfect. My son and I had been making YouTube videos for 8 years, and we were having a blast doing that, making 3 to 5, maybe even 6 or 7 videos a week. And I thought everything in my life was perfect, and then I had this event happen. Now, this event could have been anything. It could have been a stroke. It could have been an accident where I lost the use of my limbs. It could have been, in this case, blindness, cancer, loss of a loved one. Any of these events can become life-changing events that turn your life upside down. In my case, I'd always worked with my hands. I was an artist and I was a musician, and I could still play music somewhat, but I was also mostly working on cars and motorcycles and doing anything like plumbing, electrical. I was a jack of all trades and very good at that. So when this vision loss occurred, I found that all those things that were so easy for me to do before suddenly disappeared. Very frustrating because not only did I not know what to do, but I was scared health-wise. Was I dying? How fast am I dying? Of course I'm dying, everybody is, but how fast? How would I get through this? Would my vision come back? We didn't know any of those answers, but ultimately we found out that the damage was permanent. And so I've had to spend the last almost a year trying to adjust to this condition of being almost completely blind. So it's been a real horrible adjustment. And not only for me, but something that a lot of people don't realize when they have a disability is it affects their family as well. My son and I were very close, doing videos all the time, working on cars, modifying them, supercharging them, turbocharging them, just anything like that that involved a lot of high level thinking and a lot of hand skills and using tools and torque wrenches, etc., etc. So all that for me came to an abrupt stop. And that was the biggest heartbreak of all, is not being able to continue working with my son on projects. Yeah, I could still work with him, but I just end up being relegated to holding something while he, assembles it or puts something back on or whatever. There's not really any super constructive work I can do because I have no vision to see any detail. So, what I've come to realize is that when these events happen in your old life is actually essentially over. People refer to it as life A, and now you're in life B. That is a major transition to make and very hard. And I'm still going through it. I'm very, very angry all the time about it, about losing my vision. I ask God every day, hey, God, why did you do this to me? What did I do wrong? It's hard to even understand how something like that can happen unexpectedly. So for a long time, I just tried to figure out a way through it by myself. But eventually I started seeing a psychologist, and that's been a little bit helpful. So my big question now is, now that I can't see or see very well, is what am I going to do with my life? So that's why I'm making a podcast. I'm hoping this podcast will interest you. And if it does, then I hope in the future to make more podcasts and then bring on some of my friends. I actually go to the Arizona Center for the Blind 3 days a week. And I'm hoping to bring on some of my friends who also have blindness as a disability and have them talk about how they've gone through it and what their experience has been. Some of them are extremely happy, and some of them are like me, pretty angry about it still. So that's one of the things I wanted to mention that this podcast will be geared towards. And if I find that there's an audience that's interested, I will try to have other people with disabilities on. I ride on the paratransit system here in Phoenix, and I meet lots of people. I love to talk to people. I'd like to actually be sort of a radio talk show host sometimes. And so when I meet people, I could actually probably get some of them interested in coming onto the podcast and talking about their disabilities. So again, my biggest thing is, what am I going to do in life B? And so I've been searching and searching, and this podcast idea is the only thing I've come across so far in almost a year of searching. I've tried doing pottery and other things, but I found without the visual, ability to see things and work with my hands, then everything becomes just by touch and by feel. And a lot of people that are blind saying, oh, it's no problem, it's easy. No, it's not. It's incredibly difficult. And by the way, I would never hire a blind mechanic. I know there's some people that are blind that say they're mechanics, but unless they have a lot of sighted people working with them, I don't see how they can do their work and do it properly. So this has been a real difficult year for me. Some of the things I've experienced is, besides loss of independence, which, think about going from being able to go anywhere you want. Each day you can just get up and you can get on your motorcycle or car and you can go anywhere you want, to all of a sudden having to plan everything, every place you go. For paratransit, I have to call a few days in advance, make all the arrangements. Sometimes the paratransit rides, sometimes there's little as 30 minutes long to go somewhere. Sometimes they take up to 3 hours. So you lose your independence, and that's a major deal. And for me, I find myself waking up at 2:30 in the morning with a lot of anger and anxiety. And then even more than that is the idea of letting go. So you had this life A before, now you have this life B. All your material possessions you were collecting, which for me was a big deal. I collected a lot of stuff: guitars, furniture, coins, guns, you name it, I collected it. And all those material possessions become completely meaningless and useless. Well, not useless. I mean, you can still sit on a couch or something, and you have to have a roof over your head. But overall, things like collecting guns and stuff for me is no longer of any interest at all, because I can't see them and I can't shoot them. So it's not worth, much fun to me. So the other thing is just letting go in general. I wake up often at 2:30 in the morning going, oh my God, what if the plumbing breaks? What if the plumbing breaks? I can't do anything about it. What if the roof leaks? I can't do anything about it. What if somebody breaks in? really can't do much about it. What if one of my family members has an emergency and needs me? I have to call a cab to go try to find them. So again, not much I can do about it. And that is an incredibly difficult situation to be in. So that's one of the things I wanted to talk about. So as I close up, I wanted to mention a couple of things that I found interesting just in my research. I found out about 2.7% of Americans are blind. And by blind, that means either severely visually impaired or completely blind. When you talk about a blind person, only about 15% of blind people are completely blind. The other 85% are people like me that have some tiny bit of vision left, but mostly it's just enough to make you frustrated and not really a whole lot of useful stuff. And your eyesight is so important that about 30% of your brain is dedicated to vision, compared to only about 3% for hearing. So genetically and biologically, we're wired to be people with vision and sight. So again, if you like this podcast, I hope you'll subscribe to it, and I hope to make more in the future. And again, they'll be longer in the future, and I'll have guests on, and we'll talk about different things. And if you have anything you're interested in asking about as I go through this journey, please let me know, because I will try to address it. Again, I'm still in what they call the anger phase. Well, and also the denial phase. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and this is going to be a big nightmare. But until next time, we'll see you, and thank you for listening to this podcast.